Alright, so now I can go ahead and get my main gear here positioned into place. Go ahead and slide the head assembly main shaft down through. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and line up the bolt hole on the bottom, put the screw back in, get it all tightened up, and then I'm going to pull the whole rotor head assembly up as high as it'll go and slide this little shaft collar down and get that tightened up as well. Alright, moving on to the tail assembly here. So we got the tail boom mounting block. Now I've got the torque tube version, so there's really not going to be a lot I got to do to this, apart from loosening up these screws right here just to make sliding the tail boom in here a little bit easier. If you have the belt drive tail version, then you actually have to take this apart because the tail belt has to wrap around this pulley here on that version. But torque tube version, don't got to do that. So move on to the tail case here. The tail case comes with some screws in it. You're going to want to go ahead and remove those screws, apply thread locker to them, put them back in just to make sure that they have been assembled properly. Got your tail blade grips here. You're going to want to go ahead and take these off and grease the thrust bearings in here. It's just like the thrust bearings on the head assembly, so it's very familiar. Go ahead and grease them up and make sure you get some thread locker on the bolts that are securing these blade grips on the shaft there. And you got your little tail pitch slider here. Now this here, you got screws right here. You want to take those out and apply thread locker to them, but when you tighten them up, make sure you don't tighten them up too tight that these little arms don't move freely. Because if these arms don't move freely, it's going to cause you problems later on when you're flying. And then this little ball link right here, you can see it goes into a plastic piece. So you don't apply thread locker to that. What you're actually going to want to do is use a little bit of CA glue or super glue, and just a little drop, kind of glue this ball link into the plastic part there. And then also, when you finally do go ahead and get this on the shaft here and get ready to screw it together, make sure you don't over tighten it again, because this has to move nice and smooth. And if you over tighten the screw here with this little washer or bushing inside here, you can get it too tight that it's completely stuck, and you do not want that. So then also here, you can see I'll just leave this like this. After you get this part assembled, then you can go ahead and put this on, and you got the two washers. Just make sure you use brass washer above it and below it, and make sure that this is all assembled first prior to putting this on, because you gotta see here, it's got to slip down like that. Oops. I'm gonna go ahead and get this all buttoned up, and I'll come back. Alright, so I got the tail box all situated. So now moving on to the torque tube shaft here. Now you can see here it comes encased in this nice little holder, and this holder has another purpose besides containing the shaft here. So what you're going to do is, you can see here you got the bearing on the torque tube shaft. Now this has to be glued right in about the middle of the shaft. And what I recommend you doing is, before you actually try putting glue on it, I would recommend sanding the area you want to glue real quick, because this is a nice smooth surface. So the glue doesn't necessarily want to stick to it because it's so smooth. But if you sand it up with a little bit of sandpaper, get it roughed up, glue will stick a lot better, and you won't have to worry about this bearing coming off. But what I would do is I would lightly coat the shaft with just a really thin coating of glue, and then very carefully slide the bearing into the glued area. But be very careful that the glue doesn't come up and get inside the bearing, because if the glue gets inside the bearing, well, that's just going to ruin your day. So I'm going to glue this, and I'll show you what you do next. Alright, so I got the bearing all glued into place here. It's not going anywhere. So next, you get a little plastic bag with these two plastic links and this little rubber piece. Now this piece is the bushing for the bearing here, so you can go ahead and slide this over the bearing. Get it centered on there, make sure it's not binding up or anything like that. So now what you got to do is go ahead and get this inside your tail boom. Now you got the two ends here. This end goes in the tail block. It's got the little cutout. It's going to be easier if you go in from this end. So what you want to do before you do this, though, you actually want to get this all greased up, get a nice good coating of oil grease on it, help it slide down through the tail boom, because it's not going to slide in there very easily. So nice good coating of oil will help with this. Alright, so now what we're going to do is go ahead and get it started in the tail boom, and you want to go ahead and just get it started going down through there. Alright, so now what you're going to do is take, using this plastic tube that you got that was holding the torque tube shaft, you can slide down and you can kind of go through and start getting this down into place. And again, this doesn't slide down here very easily, so having a good coat of oil on there is really going to help you. Alright, so I got it most of the way in there. Actually, no, I got to go a little bit further. Alright, there we go. I got it in the middle. I may have to adjust that a little bit here or there, but just make sure that it still spins nice and smooth. You can even look down in through here to make sure that that little plastic bit or the rubber piece is nice and lined up in there and not all cockeyed to the side. But generally, if it spins nice and smooth still, then it's positioned in there nice and good. Alright, to give you a basic idea of how far down the shaft needs to go, you're really only going to want to leave just the metal end of the torque tube shaft sticking out the end. If you leave any more than that, you're not going to be able to get your tail box on there because that hole has to line up with that hole. And again, you can imagine if there's too much of the shaft sticking out, those holes won't line up. But then you can go ahead and get the tail boom mounted into the tail block and everything. Now make sure you get the little arms for your tail servo mounting plate on, as well as your linkage guides for your tail servo linkage. Get all that stuff on the tail boom before you go ahead and get these ends tightened down, because as you can imagine, after you put the ends on, there's nothing that you can slide down the tail boom. So I'm going to go ahead and get these on. I'm going to get my vertical fin on, horizontal fin. Make sure horizontal fin you use the little plate underneath it. You got this section here. And you got the screws for your tail fin right here. And then also go ahead and put the little arms or the ball link ends on the linkage guide after you get this into place. Well, put one on, alright, and then slide it down and then stick the other end on. And then I'm going to go ahead and get this mounted into the helicopter. Put my tail boom struts on. And one final thing about the tail linkage guide here. So they've got no screws to tighten them up, and you can see there that they're pretty loose. The way to get these tight is you get your zip ties here, and usually I save like the ends of them. And what you do is you just lay it on the tail boom and then slide the linkage guide up over it. And there you go. Now it's locked into place. You just trim off the excess and you're good to go. Alright, so that completes basics assembly of the kit. Now I'm going to go over the link lengths and all that stuff when I go through setup and whatnot, so don't worry, I will cover that coming up here in the future. But again, that was just basic assembly of the kit, and now look for the next video on installing the electronics.